of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. As I said at 9:30, a rather weak pun, but one thing about preaching on Palm Sunday is you don't want to make an ass of yourself. Somebody else said after the sermon that they got a kick out of my sermon too. Donkeys have long been about among my favourite four-footed animals. Oh. No doubt this affection was fostered by their significance in the Bible, especially in the events of Palm Sunday. In fact, on my birthday each year, my daughter renews a sponsorship for me, a sponsorship of one of the many animals living out their days, usually after hard labour, neglect or abuse, in the donkey sanctuary in Belfast, Northern Ireland. So this is my friend Felicity. Let me tell you a little bit about donkeys to set the scene. Donkeys have faithfully served mankind for over 5,000 years. Today there are about 41 million of them worldwide, 96% of them in third world countries, where from long before the time of the Gospels, they have played a vital role in transportation of goods and people. They are so valuable to poorer farmers in many African countries that their owners, bearing arms, have to watch over them at night to make sure they do not contribute to the several million stolen worldwide each year for slaughter to meet the demand for gelatin from their skin for traditional Chinese medicine. Fortunately, only last month, the African nations agreed to outlaw the sale of donkeys to China. The humble donkey, stubborn beast of burden, often abused, regarded as the stupid ass. In fact, donkeys are stubborn when self-preserving, but they are known to be intelligent, cautious, lively, playful, and eager to learn. In the Bible, they are mentioned over 100 times. Think of Balaam's speaking ass, Samson killing 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass, Job with his 500 female donkeys. Just imagine the dawn chorus on that farm. In Christian tradition and art, Mary is born by a donkey from Nazareth to Bethlehem before the birth of Jesus. But by far the most significant mention of donkeys in the Bible is the one associated with today. So let's look at that a little more carefully. The account of Palm Sunday in Luke begins with Jesus telling two disciples to go to a certain village, at the entrance to which they will find a donkey foal that no one had yet ridden, and which they should untether and bring to Jesus. This they did, and when the owners, and note this, it was the owners themselves, challenged them, they replied as Jesus had instructed them, "The Lord needs it." Now, one school of thought says that this shows Jesus' powers of insight and foretelling, a kind of supernatural thing. However, it seems to me that the explanation of this event should be an exercise in Occam's razor. William of Ockham was a medieval philosopher who is best known for this one thing, and of course he wrote it in Latin, and the direct translation is something like, "Entities are not to be multiplied without necessity," which actually is almost a contradiction of his, the meaning of this, which is the simplest explanation is the most likely one. I wish people would take that into account with all these conspiracy theories you hear today. Accordingly, I would suggest that the more likely explanation of this incident is that Jesus had a pre-arrangement with the donkey's owners. It's hard to believe that the owner of the donkey would let anyone walk off with such a valuable asset and without prior permission. Here's something that hadn't struck me before preparing this sermon. Luke clearly states that the foal was one that had not yet been ridden. Is that phrase intended to have special significance? At one level, it might show that the donkey was an even more valuable asset than appears at first reading, thereby adding weight to the suggestion of a prior arrangement with Jesus. However, at a deeper level, maybe Luke was making the point that this animal had been kept aside unused, precisely for the use of Jesus. Whatever the case, when the donkey arrives, Jesus mounts it and sets off with his disciples towards Jerusalem. Here's a picture of the triumphal entry by the great Italian artist Giotto, who depicted this on a mural around about 1305 AD, and notice I say AD, not CE, in the Cappella degli Scrovegni in Padua in Italy. And if you're ever visiting Venice, take the 20-minute train ride to Padua and have a look at the Scrovegni Chapel, because this is a spectacular set of beautiful restored murals. So an ever-growing crowd of admirers spreading cloaks and palm branches in Jesus' path, shouting, "Blessed is he who comes in the King in the name of the Lord." The scholars and biblically literate onlookers would have seen in this triumphal entry of Jesus an enactment of Zechariah's prophecy that we heard read earlier. "Daughter of Zion, rejoice with all your heart. Shout in triumph, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king is coming to you, his cause won, his victory gained, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The crowd might also have seen it as a parallel to Solomon's post-coronation entry into Jerusalem on a donkey, with the people shouting, "Long live King Solomon." Wishing no disrespect to our King Charles, especially at this time, I can't but compare his coronation procession with the one that saw Jesus entering his nation's capital. The former was a massive operation filled with pomp and circumstance, costing tens of millions of pounds. Some estimates are nearly £100 million, and symbolizing national power and pride. Jesus' procession was a statement of peace and humility, made not with flag-waving, parading soldiers and gilt carriages, but with cloaks and palm leaves strewn in the path of an ass, ridden by not just a king, but the King of Kings. In those days, Roman leaders such as Pontius Pilate would ride a horse if they came to assert their power or authority, but according to William Barclay, a donkey if they came in peace. So Jesus' unspoken message was clear. I am a king, but one who brings peace, not war. A king with established credentials of forgiving, healing, and acceptance of all, including the rejected and underprivileged. As I suggested above, at least some of the crowd would have understood the message, but others, perhaps most, would have looked on Jesus as the expected Messiah, one who would lead the Jewish people to victory in the fight against the Roman occupiers of their sacred homeland. We know how fickle supporters of football, or as you Kiwis insist on calling it, soccer teams can be. Before the game, there is much chanting and singing in full expectation of a dazzling victory. But if things go wrong, like they did recently for West Ham supporters when their team was being hammered by Arsenal, the once fanatical supporters start to leave the game early. Those that remain to the end, often chanting and booing their dissatisfaction with the team and its coaches. Did many of those in the rejoicing, adulatory crowd on Palm Sunday turn against Jesus on Good Friday because then they saw, instead of their all-conquering kind of Messiah, a broken, bleeding victim of the brutality of a Roman flogging? Perhaps even those who had properly understood Jesus' Palm Sunday message failed him then, being too afraid to speak up when the Jewish religious leaders prompted the crowd to yell for Jesus to be crucified. We are fortunate to have the full picture of the events that week, the week that began with the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. we know that the kingdom of the risen Jesus, King of all kings and Lord of all lords, is based not on might in the traditional sense, but on the overwhelming scale and scope of God's love, as revealed in his Son, first on Palm Sunday riding on a lowly pack animal, and later that week by enduring all that his enemies could inflict upon him. This is a man who, in the throes of his own agony, could turn to his penitent, criminal, crucified neighbor and say lovingly, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Let me return to the donkey, because I can't resist here G.K. Chesterton's magnificent soliloquy of the donkey. When fishes flew and forests walked, and figs grew upon thorn, some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. With monstrous head and sickening cry and ears like errant wings, the devil's walking parody on all four-footed things. The tattered outlaw of the earth, of ancient crooked will, starve, scourge, deride me, I am dumb, I keep my secret still. Fools, for I also had my hour, one far fierce hour and sweet. There was a shout about my ears, and palms before my feet. Fools, for I also had my hour, an hour that most of the world, alas, still fails to recognize. Let me end by introducing another of my friends, Roy, who was at school with me in Edinburgh from age 11. Roy was a shy, gawky, odd-looking boy, and so with the inimitable cruelty of pre-teens, we nicknamed him Goofy. 25 years after leaving school, my class had the first of its 4 reunions. Being in our mid-40s, most of us had some kind of standing in our chosen professions. In particular, much was made of the successful lawyers and doctors and accountants and the like among us. These were the ones the school liked to boast about. We learned at that reunion that Goofy Roy was in fact severely and chronically troubled with schizophrenia. Although he is a highly intelligent fellow, this affliction had made it hard for him to face the world, to get qualifications, to hold down a job, let alone, alas, find a wife and raise a family. Even joining his peers at our reunion was a major struggle for Roy, and no doubt he felt overwhelmed by the success of his classmates. But some of us felt not a little uncomfortable about our classmates' emphasis on what the world called success. In fact, the biggest, though unsung, success story was probably Roy's, in that he had managed to hold down a job as a gardener in the city parks department for many years. I'm glad to say that Roy's become more confident over the intervening years and now is part of a weekly coffee group of our classmates in Edinburgh. He's also a committed Christian, and Vivian and I were privileged to have him offer a prayer for us at our last reunion last year. However humble he may seem in the eyes of the world, and even though he probably is unaware that he has had his hour, an hour extended over decades of coping with schizophrenia, Roy knows that he is loved and respected by us, but more importantly, by the one that really matters. Perhaps most of us have, like Roy, felt at times in our lives that we are of little significance, that our contribution to our work or family life is as nothing compared with our neighbours, let alone with those whom the world sees as leading figures. Perhaps we just feel downright low, unloved and unrespected. At such times as these, we should take this advice. Remember the donkey and his hour. But more than that, remember the one who rode on the donkey's back, the Prince of Peace, whose love for each of us is unending and unfailing. Amen.